Good morning. How are you? I am very good. Happy to be here. It's going to be a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. So I hope everybody enjoys the long weekend. But we're back. We're going to do another ID channel, Evil Lives Here. This is season 2, episode 4, The Horror I Don't Remember. This was first aired January 30th, 2017. I like to give trigger warnings, and in this one, obviously it's not a good story. I mean, it wouldn't be on Evil Lives Here if it was a good story. So, but I want to say, I don't know how. There's just obviously violence, and if violence bothers you, probably isn't the right series to begin with. But I don't really think there's like trigger. There's no abuse. There's no sexual assault. Any of that. This one was a pretty tame story until we get to the plot. So I'm just going to jump right in. Everything that I use will be linked down below for you. If you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, please let me know. In the meantime, please like and share this video if you enjoy my Evil Lives Here series. And hit that subscribe button, guys, please. That means everything to me. I'm trying to build this up and make it work. So with no further ado, we will start. And we're going to start with the production team. There's a production lady asking, okay, I said that wrong. There's a production team. I really don't know if it's a female or a male. I remember they said, please read this letter to the camera, but I don't remember if it was a female or a male. And it was a lady who will be our narrator. The production team asked her to read it nice and slow, take her time. So that's kind of how it starts this episode. And we see a handwritten letter. And this narrator is telling us that the letter was written by Brian in 1989. So the camera zooms onto the letter, and we see very neat, small handwriting. I can read just a few lines because it's kind of off camera, so you see just parts of it, but you can't read the whole thing. It starts, and I'm going to read... I know she's going to read it to us, so I'll try to paraphrase that, but I'm going to read what I see. And it starts with, quote, "Hi, how have you been doing, sis?" End quote. So that's really, we learn a few things. 1989 is when this letter was wrote. Brian is the brother, and the sister is our narrator. Okay. I can make up bits and pieces throughout, but like I said, I'm going to try to paraphrase what the narrator, who we learn is Sherry, what she is going to tell us. So she starts reading, and she's like, "Dear Sherry." Then in the letter, Brian talks about being sorry for the crimes that he has committed. So she reads part of the letter, and it sounds like he is saying he didn't do it, or if he did, he didn't remember doing it. And he says that, you know, he's still her brother and he still loves her. And there's a picture shown of a young man in handcuffs being put into the car by a policeman. And it's a weird picture because the young man I should probably get started. The young man in the picture looks to be very young, like teenage young. And the policeman who has him in handcuffs, taking him, and you can see the police car, he's like looking at the camera, and there's a slight smile on his face. Now, when I saw that at first, I'm like, why is he smiling? But, you know, now knowing the story, I know he's probably grimacing, and that wasn't a smile at all. And actually, I hope that is to be the truth. I can't imagine he is smiling to the camera after the crimes that are committed. So, there's multiple handwritten, pages of this letter, and you know, she doesn't read it all. She just reads some highlights, like, you know, he still loves her, he's still her brother, blah blah blah. And he signs it, quote, "Love always and forever, your brother Brian T. Britton." All right, so we now know who this guy is and who he is to the narrator in a timeline. I don't know, you know, if the events happened in 1989 or if that's just when the letter was written. I mean, we'll find out a lot of that here soon. But it's always a good start when we know who's talking, who's the person talking, narrating the story, who she is to the character, who she or he is to the character of the story, and timeline. It's always nice to know where they're at, which I don't find that out for a while. So, and Evil Lives Here tell us in their little pop-up bubble that Sherry Schaefer has never forgiven her brother, Brian Britton, for what he did to her on March 22nd, 1989. So, 1989 it is. Okay. Sherry then tells us, this letter means nothing to her. It didn't mean a thing because he didn't admit to anything. He was not sorry or remorseful for what he did. That she is living without people she loves, and he can't even admit he did anything wrong. And he says that something was wrong with his head, giving an excuse for what he did, but not ever taking responsibility. And she's really upset with the fact that he won't admit what he did, but he wants his freedom. So, spoiler alert, in case it's not clearly mentioned, he is in jail. And the letter that she read, he wrote to her while in jail. So, if he wrote the letter in 1989 and the events happened in March, it actually happened at a pretty decent... think about it. It usually takes a long time in these cases for the person that's responsible to go to jail. But in this case, not so much. And we will get to that, obviously. So, she's upset he wants his freedom. He won't even admit he did anything wrong. And she has a hard time understanding his logic. And she cannot forgive him for what happened. So... after the intro, we come back to Sherry in the graveyard, and she's taking flowers to a grave. And so we're still not knowing yet who, what, where, and how. We just know the main players being Sherry and Brian. It gets a little disturbing in my mind. So she's taking the flowers to the grave, and there's multiple buried here. As shows a nice headstone, there's 3 headings. So she starts, she sits down and she's talking to them, and about how she misses them and blah, blah, blah. We still don't know who's buried in the spot. And then they show us the headstone. And it is, in fact, 3 people listed on the headstone. Okay, so there's a Dennis, and I did the calculations from the year he was born to the 1989. He was 45 years old when he died. Jason, who was in the middle, was 9 years old when he died. And Marlene, 42 years old when they died. Okay. Sherry says that when she visits the cemetery, it always reminds her of what she lost, which, yeah, I mean, that's the hardest, really, thing about the cemetery, right? But she hates that she cannot hug and kiss them. And that Brian took all of that away from her. And so, we're starting in, and obviously I know the story now, but starting in, it's a pretty good lead-in, and you just know, right now, something tragic has happened, right? She said, looking back, she could see the signs that Brian was giving off, that there was something terribly wrong, that Brian was spiraling out of control. But even though they saw that there was problems, they didn't realize how big the problem was going to get. And I guess that's pretty typical for anybody. I mean, come on. family member, we see things and we might realize it's not normal or it's not good, but we don't realize it's actually dangerous. You just check, depending on the age, you can chalk it up to, like, it was a rebellious teenager. You can chalk it up to hormones, or maybe they're drinking or whatever, but we can see the signs and still not understand the problem, right? And I think that is really relevant for most things these days. So now we see a house, and she's not actually going inside this house. So I get the feeling someone else owns us. She's standing outside the fence and she's pointing at areas in the backyard, in the front yard, or whatever. And this is the house that she grew up in from the time she was 7 until she was 17. And I don't know why she said 7. I actually have an idea why she said 17, but I know she was older than that when the events happened, and it happened in that house. She said there was a lot of good times in that house. She said she mentions her father barbecuing in the backyard, her cousin and her in the yard sunbathing, riding bikes. It was just a normal childhood. They lived in this neighborhood, and I know I did. I had friends we hung out with. I roller skated. I got on my bike. We played neighborhood, like hide and seek. We did all of these things, and it was in the 80s. We sunbathed. It was really kind of the sign of the time, and everything she was talking about, I completely related to, right? So she even talks about Brian being a sweet kid, and he'd ride the bike along the neighborhood and he would be playing with the boys across the street. Typical boy stuff, things that my brothers did as well. They all hung out in their groups. They played their sports. They rode their bikes. They, terrorized the siblings or other older kids in the neighborhood. So I will say that Sherry is the oldest, Brian is the middle child, and Jason is the baby. And I say that because we get to this point where she mentions that Brian could be very jealous, and he was often jealous of his youngest brother, Jason. She says, and I quote, "Brian was missing something, common sense, concern for other people, and if it wasn't about him, he didn't care," end quote. And I was like, all right. She laid it all out there. She says he's clearly missing something. And it could be as simple as common sense, which, come on, we all know when you're missing common sense, you could be missing quite a bit, right? Common sense is just... And, I always say, common sense isn't common. That is kind of my thing. I've said this for years. And what makes sense for others, like your youngest brother would get more attention from the parents because he was little, and he was little. People miss that. There's nothing you can do about it. You cannot grow common sense. You cannot learn common sense. These things are just pretty much you have them or you don't. That's my little rant. I'm off my pedestal. Let's just get going. So, as I said, they're showing pictures of the family, and you can see that Sherry's the oldest. Brian, like I said, Brian's the middle child. Jason's the baby of the family. And it kind of looks like there's a good number of years between her and Brian. And honestly, I learned that there's really not. There's like 3. But I guess he looks so much younger in these pictures. And I will say, let me do some quick math in my head. Brian was probably 6 to 7 years older than Jason, which meant that, Sherry's touching 10 years older than Jason. Actually, Sherry would be 10 years older than Jason now that I'm doing that math. So there was a pretty good gap. And that's what I said when Brian was showing jealousy to his brother. Yeah, he was He was older, you know. He was 6 or so when his brother was born. So, you know, honestly, Jason would have got a lot of the attention because he was the baby, and there was so much age difference between them. I mean, it's kind of to be expected, right? Okay, so now get back to it. I keep getting off on these little tangents, and I'm sorry. Sherry says that her and Brian got along fine, you know, normal sibling rivalry. But they didn't really have any problems, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily close, right? I mean, she was the typical teenager that didn't want anything to do with her brother, who was a number of years younger than her. And, you know, come on. Nothing unusual about that. That's pretty common, right? It's just what it is. So, where am I at? Sherry tells us that when Brian was younger and he'd get mad, he would start hitting people. And just wouldn't stop. I mean, he would just start hitting and hitting and hitting. And, you know, the littlest things would set him off. Like, she tells a story where she made fun of Brian because he was wearing camo all the time. So, I mean, she was, you know, just teasing normal sibling things. And he literally attacked her and started, you know, just pounding on her. And I hate that the mower's going behind us. I hope you really can't hear that as well as I think you can. I'm not sure I like this makeup. Anyways, so we find out that when Brian became a teenager, so up to this point, he's not even a teenager, and he's already abusive and jealous and hitting people and whatever. But when he became a teenager, it became worse. And it would get to the point where he would start stealing Sherry's money. So Sherry said, you know, she went to work, and every, I guess, Friday, let's say Friday, I don't really remember, but it was, you know, payday, she would take some of her money. She said they got paid in cash. I don't know what she did. She didn't really tell me. We're good friends. She tells me. She didn't really mention, and if she did mention it, I don't remember. But she would take part of her check and lay it out for her mother with a deposit ticket to put in the bank for her. So she was putting money away in the bank. And she said, and it just started one day where she would be like $20 short here and there. And Brian started bringing home magazines and started getting subscriptions that were magazines. Is the one thing she specified. So she said, you know, he started getting this subscription, and she said it was a $20 subscription. And she was like, okay, that's where my money's going. But when she confronted him, he became very violent, and you know, it just became, it was so much easier to lose the $20 than it was to fight with him, she said. And that's such a sad statement, and it probably has a lot to do with this story, because it just became easier to let him get away with it than it was to fight with him. So he started stealing from her, and she knew it, but she thought, well, it's just a phase, he'll grow out of it. And you know, I absolutely hate when people say that, because violence and such isn't necessarily a phase that people grow out of. It's a lot of times a very telling issue. But that was her hope. He would grow out of it and just move on with her life, right? She tells us, and I quote, that evil does exist in this world, and it's not like the evil you see in a scary movie, end quote. She tells us that Brian was the typical blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, and she always wondered what went wrong. You know, he was the all-American kid. But, again, it goes to show we just don't know what's underneath what's going on. You know, what people are actually thinking, and I don't know. Okay. Don't know if I made that any better or not. Okay, so when Brian turned 15, he became obsessed with war movies. You know, he was already wearing the camo, so this was honestly kind of... It didn't surprise me, this escalation in his growth here, right? And it showed, he said that, or she said that their father and Brian would watch all the movies, of the, you know, war movies that come out, and he would watch them multiple times. Like, Dad and them would watch it once, but Brian was watching them, and just like religion, he was just obsessed with these war movies. So, his goal was to go into the military, and she actually thought that the military would be good for him. That it would show him some or he would have to learn discipline and things of that nature, and she really thought it would be good. However, you know, his bedroom became like this shrine to violence. He had all these posters, and he, you know, the war posters, the movies, he had a Marines sticker all over. He had multiple, and he collected hand grenades and had all kinds of bullets, gun magazines, and he wore that camo all the time. And we're seeing actual pictures of his room as we're looking at this. As I'm telling you, I'm looking at these pictures, and you know, obviously they blurred out the posters on his wall, but I can tell you, because I knew the posters and I knew the movie well, he was like big into Rambo, and I think I read somewhere that was the nickname he wanted to be called. So he also had a gun rack with numerous guns, and she said that it was normal to have the guns in their room because they were hunters. Said her dad taught him how to shoot and hunt early. They went all the time, and he was allowed to have these guns because his father had shown him proper use and proper care and how to shoot. And the rule was he was never allowed to have those guns down by himself, that his father always had to be there and had to be home. It had to be a safe environment. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of that because there's so many thoughts and what's going on, and with the recent shooting, I'm just not going to touch that. But I guess now would be a good time. This should be the trigger warning that I gave earlier, that this does involve shooting, and though it's not like a school or anything like that, as I've mentioned, the brother is very young. So if that's going to bother you, especially in this current atmosphere, please go ahead and back away from this video at this point. And I'm sorry I didn't think of this sooner than now. So obviously Sherry makes the comment that their dad would have never shown him how to use the gun if they had known, you know, what we know now, that how Brian was going to use the guns and how it would, the eventual outcome of this. I get that. I mean, seriously, 2020 looking back is that's just it. That is, all of us have the best 2020 vision when we're looking backwards. So Sherry now tells us that Brian went through a phase where he was interested in Chinese throwing stars, nunchucks, etc., anything like that, and he would, and I'm telling you, he would get these nunchucks out, or no, the throwing stars, and he would throw them in the house at like the wood paneling on the wall and whatever, and Mom would obviously get upset. I mean, come on, it's her house, you're putting holes in her wall. And his parents would take the stars away, but he would just go and get more. So it became this kind of, what do you do situation, right? His parents were worried. I mean, they thought if they could get him through to when he can go to the military, it was also going to be a good thing for him. So they were all convinced the discipline he was lacking, the respect that he needed, he could learn in the military. But, you know, they were really struggling, and that was their goal. Just one more day, just get through whatever. So, God, what a sad, hard life that would be. Just trying to survive until you can get your kid in the military. I don't know. So anyways, Sherry says that once they grew up and everybody started dating, their parents had a rule that their education was more important and they could only see their boyfriend and girlfriend one time a week. It was usually on weekends after homework and such was done. Now, Sherry's like, yeah, I didn't care. I understood whatever, but I'm sure there was more to it than that. But this story is about Brian, so we will, I'll chuckle that she said that she didn't care she couldn't see her boyfriend and go on. Sorry, it's hard to talk and do mascara. But Brian didn't agree with his parents, and he would see his girlfriend whenever he wanted to and spend all the time with her, and he didn't like being told he couldn't, and he became very combative, very aggressive to his parents whenever they tried to tell him, you can't see her, if she was at the house, she needs to go home, we have rules for a reason, yada yada yada. So the reenactment, and I've talked about the reenactments before, they're very good for what they are, and it gives us a feeling of things, but at the same time, how much of it do you take at a grain of salt, right? But in this reenactment, he's threatening his mother, he'd like her to die, just go away, whatever, and I think I don't know if that was honestly a true fight in the family, but it was like a foreshadowing, right? So, yeah. So then, one time, his girlfriend, which sounds like she was a peach of a good example, too. She came over one day and brought a bottle of vodka to the house. And, of course, her and Brian decided to drink it. And he got drunk, like sick drunk, and passed out and scared the girlfriend. She ran and called his father. Yeah, I don't know where his father was. I think his father was at work, if I'm not mistaken. But she called the father instead of 911. Again, is what it is. I don't get it. But his father got there and saw how bad he was. He called the 911, called the ambulance because he knew his son was going to die. And it was really, really bad, apparently, because Sherry says that they had to pump Brian's stomach to save his life. And she says something that is really sad and, again, 20/20 vision. But she says, and I quote, "If she had known what she did now, I would have prevented my father from saving his life that day," end quote. And that's huge, right? She says she knows it's not a nice thing to say, that people tell her all the time that she should forgive him, but she can't. So, 2 months before the incident of this story, they were going to one of their grandparents, I believe. Yeah, it was an anniversary dinner, and they were all supposed to go, but Brian had decided he wasn't going to go, and he was going to spend time with his girlfriend. So, he literally didn't care about his family anymore, and he was just determined to do what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it, and yeah. So after a big fight, that's where they tell us that Brian was just like, he didn't care about the family anymore. So that kind of was a lead in, right? So, no, I said 2 months. I'm sorry, that was 2 days before the incident. So the day of the incident, Sherry says everything was fine. She didn't tell us what day it was, but if the party was on a weekend, you got to think this was maybe a Monday. If it was a Friday party, either way, we don't know. It was a work day. And she said her dad picked her up from college. Her last class ended that night at 9 o'clock. So she's in college. This is where I said I was confused, because it says that she lived at that house from the time she was 7 to 17, but she's older here. She's in college, and she's coming home. Now, she might have had a dorm room, so I don't know. But she said everyone was happy. Everything was good. She said when she got home after her shower, she called her boyfriend. She talked to him for a little while, and then went to bed. Okay. And she said when she woke up, and this is, I cannot even imagine. So when she woke up, she was in the hospital. She was confused and disoriented. She had a bad headache, ringing in her ears, and bandages. Her whole head was wrapped. She was she had a hole in her side, and she had no idea what happened. The doctors would only tell her that there was an accident, but she was very confused, and she kept asking for her mom and dad and where Jason was. She kept asking for everybody. She said, except for Brian. She never asked where Brian was. And she says she was 19 when her world was destroyed. So we know at this moment she is 19 years old. And something tragic has happened. So how awful would that be, that you are just going to bed in a normal night and you wake up and you're in a hospital? So now we're looking at actual photos again, and these are, where are we at? I just showed photos, and Sherry says that she was very close to losing her life that night, and she was. And she said it was scary waking up in the hospital and injured, no idea what happened to you. And she thought at first it was a dream. I mean, none of the doctors would tell her anything, including where her parents was. So she said, this has to be a nightmare. She said, this doesn't make sense, right? She just couldn't make sense of anything. And then we talked to, or we don't really talk to him, he talks to us, Detective Charles Middlestate. And he was the first to respond to the Brenton house, and now we get to hear from him. He says that it was a call he will never forget. And he says you can never be prepared to go into something like that, right? And you can't. You obviously can't. So he talks about what he found when he walked in. He said there was blood everywhere. And there's actual video and photos of this house and the clumps of blood and the clumps of hair. And, oh my God, it was just, they were horrific. That's the word I'm trying to use. And they actually had to go in assuming there was an active shooter in the house because, you know, it was all so fresh, right? The blood, everything was so fresh, they had to assume that there might have still been. So then he talks about the family. He said the dad was shot in the head and the chest. She said mom was deceased. They don't yet say where she was shot, but she was deceased, and Jason was beside her with a crushed skull. And they show us pictures of the actual clothes that, you know, mom's nightgown and Jason's little t-shirt, and it's horrific. And just covered in blood. And we get to learn a little bit more about this, and it is just so tragic. I don't even think that that's the proper way of saying it. It was more than tragic, right? Right. So, Brian used the shotgun as a club to hit Jason in the head. And there's actually more to it. Then he found Sherry, And when the detective found Sherry, she was in her bed covered in blood. She'd been shot twice, one in the head that took part of her skull, and the other in the left side of her abdomen. They truly didn't think she was going to survive. They said she was very close to death. So we see more of the gruesome pictures of the house, and it just is. So they talked to Brian immediately. I mean, he was so Brian was the only one available to talk. The rest of the family was dead, or Sherry was in the hospital. And at this time, I don't know where he was at, where they found him at. It does tell us later on these things. I guess I should say that it doesn't tell us where Brian was, but I find out later when I do my research. So, they talked to Brian, and Brian proceeds to tell him that someone broke into their house, forced their way in, had a black mask on, He was blaming somebody else. I forgot where I was at. I had So, okay. Brian's telling him that a masked guy came in and charged his way in and killed the family. And it shows pictures. I mean, I guess they believed him at first, right? They show pictures of the house, and in the back, one of the windows had like the screen pulled off and was laying on the ground. But they were talking to him, and as soon as they told him that his sister was alive, didn't die, he confessed. I mean, I guess at that point he knew his sister could probably tell what happened to him. So he confessed to everything, and Detective Middlestead, I don't really know, is back, and he's sitting in the office opposite of him, and he's saying that Brian is showing absolutely no remorse, just giving his story. And that's when he said he listened to it for like 2 minutes before he interrupted Brian and said that Sherry was alive, and he needed to know where Brian hid the guns. So Brian tells him. That's when he confesses. He knew his game was up, that he was in trouble. So Brian tells him the guns are in the attic. And that's where they found them. They show pictures of it too, where they went up to the attic and actually found the guns that he said was there. So there's more police, and then he starts to try to justify. I said the police pictures, I kind of just said that and then went on. The police pictures showed the house again and where the guns were that he hid in the attic. He just confessed that they were there, and that actually shows us there. So then Brian is trying to justify what he's done, because he's saying his mom and dad wouldn't let him see his girlfriend, and he was tired of being told what to do, and whatever. Because no matter how much he talks, there is no justification to what he has done at this point, right? There is nothing he could say. Anyways. Now we're back to Sherry. And she tells us that when she found out her parents were dead, she said that she was just devastated. She didn't know where she was going to go, what she was going to do. She had no family. And I'll talk about this later as well, because I kept thinking, I mean, yeah, she was 19, but did she go live on her own? I mean, she had this, half of her scalp was missing. It wasn't like she can just go home on her own. She probably needed help. But it is never specified who helped her in this, and I was very curious. And I never really found out, but I've got maybe a decent idea. So we'll talk about that because it's not mentioned in the episode. It's something I found Googling or DuckDuckGoing is what I've been doing. Okay, so she didn't know what she was going to be able to do, how she was going to survive. She said she felt so lonely. I get that. She started questioning why she survived, why, of all the family, was she the one that, survived it. And I think it's very normal. And I want to say, I think it's probably very normal too for a survivor to feel that, It's just, the whole, why do I deserve to live, and the guilt for being a survivor. You hear it often, and I just really feel like that's probably what she was going through, right? She said there was a lot of things that happened in her life since her parents' death that she couldn't share with them. Graduating college, she got married, she has children, she has grandchildren. None of that she was able to share with her parents because of what Brian did. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. So now it's telling us it took Sherry 28 years to try to remember what happened that day because she had no memory of what happened to her. None. She said, she went to bed that night, she woke up in the hospital. She really needs and wants to know the in-between. So, I get that. I mean, I think it's absolutely sad that she can't remember. But I think, in a way, it might be a good thing. She's probably blocked all that out to self-preserve herself, and self-preservation is what I'm trying to say. I get that. I also get that she wants to know, she needs to know. But at the same time, personally, I would want to know, but would I pursue it? I mean, I'd be glad I have my memories of my family, because at least that wasn't taken from her, But would I want to know the rest? That is such a question that I struggle with because I don't know. I just don't know what I would want. So she's decided that is what she wants. And the detective Middlestade was going to help her. So, of course, he's retired at this point, but he is going to help her piece together some of the things that happened so maybe she can, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's trying to help her remember, but he's also trying to give her some peace, right? So, detective meets with her. He actually has her come into the station. He has it set up where, he's there with all the evidence, and he actually shows her video and pictures of that day. And honestly, I don't think they held back. They went the full everything. This is what happened. This is you. This is your brother. This was your father. And whoa, I mean, really, how difficult would that be, right? I mean, you have no memory of this, and now you're having to live it. And I can only hope that when she lived it, even though it was her mother and her father, she didn't have to relive. I don't know. Does that even make sense? Because, of course, she's going to relive and so she's learning a little bit more about the actual thing. So we've learned so far what she knew to be fact, right? What she knew, or not, well, her version of what happened, which wasn't necessarily the full story. So, I gotta get this even real quick, and then we'll move right on. I'm not even. So the detective tells her that her mother was in the kitchen. Okay, I'm skipping a part. Brian killed his father first, as he was the biggest threat and could possibly stop him from achieving his goal. And so he killed his father first when he was in bed. Then he went to his mother, who was in the kitchen, and he shot her. And it's said that Jason was with her. So how did that happen? Because apparently he wasn't at first. And he says that Jason did fire a gun at Jason, but missed. And Jason apparently ran out of the room because, Brian went to his room and found his mother laying on the floor covered in blood, and probably already did at this time, though Jason might not have understood that. And he laid down beside his mom, wanting his mom to, he was looking for protection from his mom. And Brian then used the shotgun, and clubbed him to death, crushed his skull. So, this is not fun. Then apparently, Sherry heard the commotion, right? There's gunshots, probably screaming, whatever. And they said from what they can piece together on Sherry, she tried to run, and he shot her. And I don't know if he shot her head first or whatever, but he shot her. And whatever it was that he did, I forgot the contour of my nose, it disoriented her enough that she wasn't really thinking. So she went to the bathroom, and they said you could tell that she took some, it might have been her head, because she took some pain pills like a Tylenol or Advil or something, and because her head hurt. And then she went back to bed. And I chuckle a little bit, but believe me, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm very grateful, and it's not anybody I know, but I'm very grateful she doesn't actually remember the episodes and what actually happened. So after she went back to bed, Brian came back in there again and shot her again. So it is a miracle that she survived. A bona fide, I cannot believe she found. And that's where they found her, in her bed where he shot her. So Sherry's talking about what she's seeing, the videos, the pictures, and everything, and she's talking about how shocked she is about how much blood there was. And she's like, I don't know why I would have stopped in the bathroom. And she probably went back to her bed because it gave her comfort, and whatever was going on was so traumatic, and she wasn't quite, she's gone someplace. She's not really sure what's going on, but she knows she wants to be somewhere she's comfortable, and she's safe. Her bed was safety. This is so heavy. I'm sorry. I'm struggling with it all. So the detective then tells her that Brian tried to use the excuse that his mother was trying to discipline him. She couldn't. He had been out late, and he had gotten in trouble, and she didn't want him to see his girlfriend. That's the excuse he's trying to give the detective, and the detective's telling him telling her that that's what Brian tried to use. Brian, or the detective, says it was definitely premeditated. That there was no way that he just decided in a spur of the moment to get up and annihilate his family. And Sherry's like, is very upset because it's so horrific to know that her brother did this. That somebody, part of her, you know, flesh and blood, did this to her and her family. She said she struggles with the fact that the cold hard facts of it was that her parents were defenseless and never had a chance. He attacked them in such a way that, you know, they never even saw it coming. It was just so brutal. And she said it was a relief to finally sit down and to learn what actually happened that day instead of relying on what people were telling her. You know, she was seeing it for herself now, and she was able, it doesn't say if she was actually able to remember anything. I don't know. And, I mean, if she's got the resolution that she wanted and needed, then that's really all that matters, right? I mean, so then we find out that in 1990, Brian, it was quick. I mean, he killed him in March of 89. He went to jail in 90, and he was writing letters while he was in jail, but he was sentenced. And the sentencing confused me, and we will get to that too. But in 1990, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. 25 years to life for killing 3 people, and one of them being a small child. And my first reaction, I was just so stunned when I read that. And then I read more about why he got that, but I don't really even care because that is just ridiculous. He should have just had life with no parole, or, I mean, I don't know. I'm not even going to, but I'm surprised the death sentence wasn't mentioned. I mean, there's just so much that shocks me, right? Sherry says that every 2 years, now this is the truly sad truth of something like this. She says every 2 years, every 2 years, Brian has a parole hearing. And every 2 years, she fights to keep him in jail. Now, this happened in 2017, so obviously, at the end, I had to Google and find out the current status, and I'll get to that. But, that's pretty. So every 2 years, she has to relive the nightmare of that day. And she has to write a letter to the parole board explaining why she doesn't want him out. And I am so devastated for her that she has to do this. It's just, I mean, the worst day of her life at such a young age has happened. And it just keeps happening. She keeps getting victimized, in my opinion. So she reads her recent letter that she wrote to the parole board asking for his parole to be denied. And at the time of the 2017, it had been 26 and a half years. And they show part of this letter, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but it states that it states that he should stay in prison for her safety, her kids' safety, and the citizens of New York's safety. So this is the first time we hear that where, you know, this happens. He's in New York. And sorry, I just realized I needed to finish. Sherry says it never ends for her, that she has to keep reliving this and work to keep him in prison because he does not deserve his freedom. I get that. I agree with that. I agree 100% with that. He's never, again, she keeps hitting on that. He's never shown remorse. He's never been sorry or anything for what he did. He truly feels like he was justified because his parents wouldn't let him see his girlfriend. Wow. She says the hurt that he has caused will always be with her and never go away. And she said, Brian got it easy. She said, the people outside are the ones that suffer. And that is so true. It really is. So, now, that was the end of the episode. And like I said, that was a very heavy episode. And I'm sorry in advance I didn't give a trigger warning. But if you hung out with me, I appreciate it. So I did an internet search trying to find out if he was still in prison and what the status was. Is Sherry still having to go every couple years and write this letter and beg for them not to let the killer out? Okay. So the first link that I see is titled, Where is Brian Britton Now? Oh, that's a good title because that's what I want to know. And I want to do my lipstick and come back because I can't talk and do lipstick. So I learned on this site that his next parole hearing is in May of 2023. So I'm going to click on this, and I haven't clicked on it yet. It's just like it says, where's Brian Britton now, and then his next parole hearing. Okay, so he's still in prison, and the website is thenetline.com, and it states that Brian was 16 years old when he tried to kill his whole family. Now we know that Sherry was like 3 years older, so if she's 19, that makes sense. But hearing it out loud is so different than just doing some simple math in my head that I could be wrong. So he was 16 years old when he tried to kill his whole family, and his last parole hearing was in November 2021. He was rejected, obviously. He first became eligible for parole in November 2017. So it was only months after the original airing of this ID channel's Evil Lives Here episode. And in 2019, Brian filed a petition and claimed, quote, that the board relied too heavily on the nature of his crimes to deny him parole, end quote. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? I mean, isn't his crimes what got him in this position? And shouldn't we look at his crimes and why we keep him there? He also claims that his record and achievement in prison shows he is a reformed man. And it doesn't really claim what he's done or says he's done or why he's reformed, but, So apparently, okay, so to explain the 25 to life, he didn't go to trial since he admitted to what he had done and pleaded guilty. So he took the deal given to him, which was 25 years to life. And it's very possible he would have gotten a harsher sentence had he gone to trial. He had confessed to second-degree murder and assault, and if he had gone to trial, he would have faced 3 consecutive 25-year life sentences and the possibility of death. So by admitting what he did and taking the deal that he did, he's got a lighter sentence. And because of that, Sherry's life is hell because every couple of years she has to try to keep him in jail. And Sherry's last letter to the parole board, she wrote, and I quote, "This is a man who has never held a job in the outside world. After all, he was 16 going on 17 when he committed these murders. He wouldn't know how to function in today's society. He has had 28 years to think about what he could possibly do to harm me when he gets out," end quote. Most articles that I'm reading are regarding to his parole and him being denied. And I click on a Yahoo News article regarding Brian, and it looks like it's from the Poughkeepsie Journal. It states that Brian is from Poughkeepsie, New York, and it is a city in New York that I'm very unfamiliar with, and the name is hard to say. And one link I went to, monstersandcritics.com, states that Jason was alive when the police found him, but died shortly after. Now, this wasn't mentioned in the episode. It just says that he died next to his mother. And it states that Brian was at his uncle's when he was questioned by the cops. So there was no mention of this either. And I wonder if the uncle is the one that stepped in to help Sherry out. But there's no reference to what Sherry did. I even tried to be specific in what happened to Sherry afterwards to now, and there's nothing. So whatever happened, they kept it very tight-knit. And it probably was due to all the publicity of the time, and I get it. So it isn't stated, and that's fine. And there is a Keep the Serial Killer Brian Britton in Prison petition on change.org. I found an article talking about Sherry and what she went through, but there was no new information, and it was pretty much exactly what we had seen on the Evil Lives Here episode. So some of the things I'm learning now, that Jason was alive and died at the hospital, that he was at his uncle, she might not have known at the time, and that's why it wasn't mentioned, because you're getting her perspective, and she didn't know. She had no memory of any of this. So again, I don't know where she ended up after being shot, but I'm hoping it was a family member that helped her out. If there was an uncle involved that Brian ran to, and that's where they found him, Shirley said uncle stepped up, but I don't really know. So that is the episode for today. Evil Lives Here. The horror, I don't remember. It was a deep one. It was very hard to get through that. Yeah, I just can't. I can't. That's all I gotta say about that. So, hope you liked the video. Like it, click it, share it, follow it, subscribe, and I appreciate it. So until next time, guys, goodbye.